Luke chapter 5, verse 33 is where we left off. Jesus is going to talk to us. He's the great physician, and he's going to talk to us about fasting. In verses 33 through 39, he talks about that. It's also covered in parallel verses in the other books at Matthew chapter 9, beginning at verse 14, and Mark chapter 2, beginning at verse 18. But we're going to stick in today's class, unless we can, I try my best to incorporate the other books as we go along, and sometime I'm able to and sometime I'm not. Verse 33, and they said to him, the disciples of John often fast and offer prayers, and the disciples of the Pharisees also do the same. But yours eat and drink. The only fast that is required was by the old law. That was the only fast that was required. It was a great day of atonement, and that's Leviticus 16 and verse 29. The other feasts were added after that. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, and if you look at Zechariah 7 and verse 5 and Zechariah 8 and verse 19. So the only fast that was required was by the old law. And so in verse 34 and 35, Jesus said to them, you cannot make attendance of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them. Can you? He's asking them a question. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, then they will fast in those days. He's telling them, you don't fast now because the bridegroom, Jesus Christ, is with you. Once he leaves, once he is not with you, then you will fast because of that. He also uses illustrations about marriage, that you cannot make the attendance of the bridegroom fast. You can't, because the bridegroom is with them. And so Jesus is trying to bring the point across to them that with the disciples, there's no need to fast because you have Jesus Christ with you. But there's coming a time that this would change when the fasting would be in order. That's what he's saying. Everybody with me? Okay. Now Jesus gives them two more examples. Verse 36. We've often talked about this. I know for years, I know that you've heard sermons on this. He gives two more examples. One we're familiar with. In verse 30, well, we're familiar with both of them, but in verse 36, no one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, he will both tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. So tell me what he's saying, you people that are seamstresses and sewers. I know how to sew, but I've never sewn a piece of cloth on another piece of cloth. It was always a rips and on the same piece of cloth. So tell me, how come this is so? Why is this so? Why if you... Am I the only one who sews? Why do you not take a new piece of cloth or an old piece of cloth and sew it on a new piece of clothing? What happens when you wash it? It doesn't react the same. It tears. And the people that are listening to this are all familiar with this. They understand what he's saying. They've had to do this, putting a patch of cloth on a garment. They knew all about this. That's how they lived their lives. They didn't have but about 2 or 3 sets of clothes, and so they had to take care of them. No one would put a new patch on an old garment because the new patch had not shrunk and the old has. So what's going to happen is going to tear both of them when it's washed, and just like you said, it will not match. They will not match. So the disciples, if they had fasted as they did, they would have done that which is, he's saying. Unsuitable spirit of a new dispensation. It's the new patch, the new cloth, and you don't put it on an old garment like the old law. Trying to put a new patch on an old garment. The new dispensation and the old law do not match. It won't work. They do not match. Yes, sir. Yes, you would. Yeah. 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 And you wouldn't take the new covenant and try to match it with the old covenant, would you? You don't take the new covenant and try to mix it in with the old covenant. Because the old covenant, what happened to it? Nailed to the cross. Colossians 2 and verse 14. It was nailed to the cross. It's gone. Any other comments? Thank you. That's right. All this was familiar to them. They knew exactly what he was talking about when he's talking about clothing. But you can't take the new dispensation, the new law of Jesus Christ, and the old law, because it will not match. Verse 37 and 39. He's going to use another example. In verse 37 and 39. No one puts new wine in old wineskins. What happens? Fermentation takes place and busts the old wine, old wineskin. So, because the old wineskin's already been stretched. Otherwise, the new wine, he says, will burst and the skins will be spilled and it will be spilled out. The skins will be ruined, the old ones. But the new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wishes for the new, for he says the old is good enough. When you put new wine in new wineskins, it permeates and stretches the skin, but it doesn't burst the old skin. Which one is the old covenant? The old wineskins. The old wineskins. You can't put the new covenant with the old covenant because it will not work. Everybody with me? Let me get out of that stuff, get out of the skins and let's move on. I will if you want me to. He's given them the same principle. He's given them the same teaching. If you put a new wine in old wineskins, the old covenant, it will bust because the new wine ferments and swells. But the new wine in new wineskins, and it'll expand and it stretches as it should. You treat the new covenant of Jesus Christ as the new law, then we all grow and develop and mature as a Christian. If the disciples had fasted the same as them, it would be unsuitable to the spirit of the new dispensation. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Did I say anything wrong? You correct me. It won't work. It would be putting new wine in old wineskins, and it will not work. Many will say, he's talking about some of them, some of the other hearers say that the old is good enough. That's what they say, verse 39. But that's not the truth of God's Word. Chapter 6, ready to go? Chapter 6, we'll have some controversy here. First, we see this controversy about the Sabbath. And let me remind everybody Who is the Lord of the Sabbath? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Yeah. And God gave the Sabbath. And He gave it as a day of rest. And the Pharisees, with their traditions, their own traditions have made their traditions equal to the old law. And it wasn't. And Jesus had trouble with that, with them, through the whole thing. That's why He kept saying, woe to you, Pharisees, in Matthew 23. Woe to you, woe to you, woe to you. Because of their traditions. So here we have the first controversy about the Sabbath in verses 1 through 11 of chapter 6. The parallel versions, if you want to look later at those, Matthew 12, beginning at verse 1, and Mark chapter 2, beginning verse 23, all the way to chapter 3 and verse 1. So let's go to verse 1 in Luke chapter 6. Now it happened that it was passing through some of the grain fields on the Sabbath. I bet you everybody I don't know if everybody in here has done this. I'll just say some of us have done exactly what these disciples did. Now it happened that He was passing through some of the grain fields on the Sabbath. This will be another opposition from the Pharisees. Here we go with them. They want to charge Jesus with violating the Sabbath, because it's a Sabbath here. They condemned Jesus and His disciples. His disciples were going through the grain fields, and as they were going through, they were grabbing the heads of that grain in their hand, and they were rubbing their hands together like that, and all that other stuff goes away, but you get to keep that grain, and you can eat that grain. How many have done that? We all have, just about. We've all done that. Walk through. You haven't done that. Don't do it. It scratches your hand up. But you go through there and grab that, you know. I did it with her grandfather and her father and my dad. And I can see this. I can see them doing this. And it's easy for us to picture them doing this. And then they're rubbing their hands and they're eating the grain. The grain is, I don't know, it's either wheat or barley, whatever it made ahead. Most likely they're walking through these fields. And verse 2 through 5. But some of the Pharisees said, oh, by the way, there's probably a pathway that they're going on. You know, they just don't cut through. There's probably a pathway they're walking through. Verse 2 through 5. But some of the Pharisees said, why do you do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Now they're using their traditions. They're using their traditions. And Jesus answered them and said, have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered into the house of God and took and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for any to eat except the priest alone. Gave it to his companions, and he was saying to them, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. He sets the rules. It's His Sabbath. So they see the first question by the Pharisees in verse 2. Why do you do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? The old law rests on the Sabbath. They're not working. It said to rest on the Sabbath. They're not working. Jesus, as far as we know, did not eat, but He could if He wanted to. If He was hungry, He could have. This question was an accusation to bring against Jesus. They want to have something they can charge against Him. And so Jesus refers them to the time of David and his men. They're running from Saul. King Saul's trying to kill them all. 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1 through 6 is where this is located. He's talking about 1 Samuel 21, 1 through 6. He was running from King Saul. They were hungry. And so the Pharisees regarded David as a man of God. And he was a man after God's own heart. And they did not condemn David for what he did. He went into the tabernacle north of Jerusalem, and he ate the showbread that was on the table in the holy place, the 12 loaves that they would set out on the Sabbath, and they had them there, and then after the Sabbath the priest would eat them. Leviticus 24 verse 59. But David wasn't condemned for doing this, and the Pharisees didn't mind at all. David and his men were hungry. They ate the bread on the Sabbath. So Jesus is showing them that David was a faithful servant of God, and that the things which are unlawful may be done under the law of necessity, because the Sabbath was designed by God, not by man. On top of that, verse 5, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. He came to this earth to redeem man as the Messiah. Jesus is indeed the Lord of all things. He is certainly the Lord of the Sabbath. He created man and this world we live in. Anybody have any comments now? Let me know. If you hear something you don't agree with or something you want to add to, just jump right in there. Verse 6. On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And there was a man there whose right hand was withered. Listen, this is the most amazing thing. We can all see this in our mind. Here comes this man. Here comes Jesus into the synagogue, and it's a Sabbath. There's another example. And this man, he cannot use this hand. This thing is withered. It is maybe smaller. It is all twisted up, gnarled up. It has been that way, and man can't do anything about that. And here you see him going into the synagogue. He was teaching, and there was a man there, verse 6, whose right hand was withered. See, Luke, the physician, is paying attention which hand was withered, and it's his right hand. This incident occurs on the following Sabbath. It was an opportunity to go there and teach the people. There is a man there, and his terrible condition with that right hand, and Luke tells us about that. Withered, he means that he's lost the use of the hand. He can't use it. In verse 7, the scribes and the Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he healed on the Sabbath, so that they might find reason to accuse him. Let me ask you something. Is there any reason why you can't heal somebody and do good on the Sabbath? No. But their traditions that they added did. I mean, they added everything to the Sabbath that God did not add. He made the Sabbath for man. And so in verse 7, they're watching him closely. Boy, you can see them watching him. And they want to find a reason that they can accuse him of. And so in verse 8, but he knew what they were thinking. And every time he knows what they were thinking, he knows what we are thinking. He knew what they were thinking. John 2 and verse 25, if you looked at John 2 and verse 25, he says, because he did not need anyone to testify concerning man, for he himself knew what was in man, just like he knows what's in our hearts. So Jesus said to the man, get up and come forward. Can you see that? Get up and come forward. In verse 9, Jesus asked, he's doing this for the benefit of the Pharisees, I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to destroy it? What do you think it is? To save a life, isn't it? To do good. Jesus had the man come forward in verse 8. He had the man rise. He had the man stand up in their midst so everybody could see what was about to happen. They could be eyewitnesses to what is going to occur to that man's right hand. In verse 10 and 11. After looking around at them all. You know what? I think about this a lot. Like the woman who had a hemorrhaging of her blood, and she touched his cloak, and he stopped, and the multitudes were pressing against him, and Peter said, well, how would you know who touched you? Well, he knew exactly, because he knew that woman was there and all about her. But if you read it, he looked at her when he wanted to look at her. Remember Peter, when he denied Jesus 3 times, and Jesus looked at him? See, this is the things I think of. In this verse 10, after looking around at all of them, can you imagine what it was like when Jesus looked at you? Oh man, the Savior of the world. He looked around at them all, and he said to him, stretch out your hand. And he did so. And his hand was restored right in the front of them and right square in front of their eyes. The hand was restored. But they, the Pharisees, they were filled with rage and discussed together what they might do to Jesus. Can you imagine? They don't even care nothing about that man. They don't care that his hand was all withered, his right hand, and right in front of their face he cured it. He made it whole. It just like his left hand now. Can you imagine being that hard-hearted that they wanted to get something on him, and so this is what they wanted to do? Jesus never spoke or touched, just his mind. His hand was healed in an instant in front of everyone. It had to be amazing and overwhelming. I would like to have been there to see that. Would you? Oh, yeah. His hand was healed. It had to be something to see this in your heart. It's so hard when they were filled with rage. What in the world are they mad about? Because of the traditions that they observed, added to the Sabbath. And Mark 3 and verse 5 says, the look Jesus gave the Pharisees while he did this was anger at them. Oh, he's mad at them. He's so upset about them. In Mark 3 and verse 5. It was because of the hardness of their hearts. That's why he's mad at them. That's why he was upset with them. How could you have a heart is so hard? And he put the Jewish leaders in a dilemma. They're in a dilemma now. Remember, he asked them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, or to do good, or to do harm? It's an obvious answer, isn't it? It's to do good. It's to do good on the Sabbath. That's an obvious answer. It's wrong to do harm or fail to do good. That's wrong. But a person has the opportunity to do good. He does it, doesn't he? The enemies of Jesus, they could not charge him because he wasn't working or laboring on the Sabbath. Healing was as quick as a snap of the fingers. That's just amazing. That hand, Todd, that hand in an instant was well. It became well in an instant. They couldn't charge him. Just a man's faith and obedience led to his healing. The man believed and received a blessing from the Lord. He believed, he had the faith to know that Jesus Christ could do this. The man believed and he received that blessing. But we can still see the Pharisees' hearts. They were in a rage, and they're talking evil together, what they might do to Jesus. They saw it with their own eyes, Darwin. They saw it happen with their own eyes, and they couldn't deny it. It was a miracle from God. He was the Messiah. They could do nothing but be mad. That's all they could do. They could just be mad and reject him. And that's what they did. Now Jesus chooses his 12 apostles. And that's in verses 12 through 19. He's going to choose those 12 apostles. Verse 12 and 13, a parallel accounts to that, to the 12 apostles. The parallel accounts are Matthew 10, verse 1, Mark 3 and verse 3, and then it follows through. So in verse 12 and 13, it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray. And he spent the whole night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. Now, I want to tell you, you need to check me out on this. There could be errors. I do the best I can, but sometimes I don't do a very good job. And I didn't. I mean, this is me raking names off, and sometimes, it don't come out like it should. So check it out, and you find something wrong, you let me know. This is, we'll be studying this. And I want to go over the back real quick before I quit. Uh-huh. Three. Four. This is, and you need to check this to make sure that it is correct. But these are the 12 apostles in the New Testament. In Matthew, you see the ones that are listed, Matthew 10, 2 through 4. And then you see their names in Mark chapter 3, verse 16 through 19. And then you see their names in Luke 6, verse 14 through 16. And you see the difference in some of the names like Thaddeus and that. So you check me close. Look at Acts chapter 1, verse 13. Who's missing? Judas. Judas. It's a short list, isn't it? There's one missing, Judas. And then added later, underneath down there, is Matthias and Paul. So over on the back are some notes. On the list you see there, who's always at the top of the list? Peter. He wasn't the chief of apostles. He never claimed to be the head elder. He didn't do anything like that. He was just on everybody's mind, I think. I mean, he acted so spontaneous. He walked on water. He denied Jesus 3 times after he walked on water. And so he was on everybody's mind, I think. That's just me. He was never the chief apostle. Maybe he was just on everybody's mind. He played a prominent role in the early church. He wrote the 2 books, 1st and 2nd Peter. Andrew was his brother. He took Peter to Jesus. And then there's son James, the son of Zebedee, is also called James the Greater. He's never mentioned apart from his brother John. He was the first apostle to be martyred. James was. Philip was a native of Bethsaida. Matthew was called Levi. James, the son of Alphaeus. And then the rest of the notes there at the bottom. This is for you. Check me out. Make sure this is correct. I don't want to do anything that's wrong. So I want you to check it close with your own study.
You know, Peter gave the first sermon. He had to be brave.
Yeah.
And the day of Pentecost,
Yeah.
he stood up there and
Spilled it out, didn't
told
he?
them what they had done
Yeah.
and what they needed to do.
Yeah, and so did the rest of the apostles too. They all did. But he was, I guess, the main speaker there. I mean, he spoke up. Any comments before we quit?